Right, so we are going through the book of Judges, and so Vance is a big fan of this story of Gideon, as he made us all aware just a little bit ago. When I say Gideon in the book of Judges, did anyone else know what I'm talking about? Oh, cool. like that. That's like over there. Like we're in the room, Vance. Like we're in the room. I got a couple people around and all that stuff. Like that's the thing is Judges just in general is filled with all of these like just wild stories, stuff that you grew up with. Gideon is actually a lot of those stories, right, Vance? Like there's a lot of stories you probably know about from Gideon. And there's a couple different ways to look at Gideon. I look at it one way. I call that way the correct way. And then there's people like Vance who look at it a different way. You know. Yeah, the wrong way. Yeah, like that's like all those things. And we hashed it out in the Bible study. If you actually go onto our Sunday page, the one that has a logo like this on the front of it, you can actually go and watch that Bible study from last year. I think it was last August is when we went through this. And so it's fascinating. But it's this Gideon story it's weird. And the reason why I'm starting it like this is to look at, I think there's this inkling inside of us that we want to fully understand something and just fully get it, you know? And it's like there is a right and a wrong, and we just like nothing ever moves. Well, you kind of got to have all these balls in the air at the same time. And that's kind of an emotional intelligence, being able to have all these different kind of views of these stories going on. Another thing that you need to understand is I think the Bible has a lot of sarcasm in it, all right? I've said this before. Not everyone agrees with me on that, but I'm correct. and that's, I think, one of the most sarcastic verses in the Bible is one that we're going to look at in just a little bit. Although there will be people in this room, Vance, that disagree with me, but that's fine. That's fine. So Judges, for those of you kind of new to all of this, Judges is like it's this cycle. And what we're getting to in the book of Judges is getting to the last verse in the book that says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes." And this book is written in a cycle that it's just cycling down, much like a toilet bowl that cycles around and just goes under it. That's what's happening in this book of Judges. What happens is that Israel sins. Now the question I have to ask is, what is the sin? Are they eating too many cornflakes? You know, are they doing like? I think it has something to do with power and thinking that they can save themselves. I think that's what's actually going on. And so they sin, and then oppression comes onto them, and they're like, "Oh no, we're being oppressed," and God, and they're like, "God, please save us." And he sends a judge, and the judge kind of brings them back into line. But the problem is we had like these judges here. Well, now we get to Gideon, and we're kind of down here as we're circling the toilet bowl going down. And so remember, all these other judges, remember Ehud was left-handed. That was a weakness. Some of you are left-handed. You're like, it's not a left-handed. It's not like, well, just remember what they were like in the Victorian era, right? Like this is left-handedness. And then also, like last week, Deborah was a woman living in a man's world back then, 3,000 years ago? And God used her to save his people, her and her pal Jael, right? Like that was what was going on. So God is using the absurd things to save his people. This is what's going on with Gideon, all right? And so in the world, around in this time, what we see is let's see. Yeah, I need to get this slide. And in this time, the Midianites had taken over, and they are just wreaking havoc. They've been in charge for like 8 years now, and everyone's just scared of them. They're so scared of them that they are processing food like wine presses and grain mills. They have built them like they're in like vaults, like covered and all that stuff, so that the Midianites won't steal their food from them, right? And that's where Gideon is. he's hiding in a wine press. He's like hiding like this, He's like, I don't want anyone to see me. And I don't know how they're pressing wine, either with like their feet or like maybe with a wheel. I don't know. But he's hiding in there terrified. And this is where the sarcasm starts. Are you ready for this? Now, not everyone thinks this is sarcasm. If you don't think this is sarcasm, that's okay. You're fine. Jesus still loves you, right? So, Judges chapter 6, begin with the 12th verse. And the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. Remember, he's like this, hiding. And he says to him, like, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Right? Remember. Like you picture it and you can see it, right? Like God comes up to him and is like, I'm with you, mighty warrior. Like that's, it's over there because and what we see is that he is a coward. Gideon is a complete coward when it comes to all these things. And listen, I get it. I don't think anyone came in this room and went, that Cris, Escher, he's the first one to run into battle. Like I don't think any of you laughed a little too much at that. I don't think that's what we're all saying here. But Gideon like talks back to God. So God's like, Gideon, mighty warrior. And Gideon's like, well, pardon me, but if the Lord is with us, if you truly are with us, why are we in this situation? Ooh, all of a sudden we're asking real questions around here, right? Like, why am I feeling all this pain? God, if you're really on my side, why has this all happened? Like, I've heard all these stories about how you've helped all these people in the past. I've heard all these stories about how you parted the Red Sea and brought the people out of Egypt. Pay attention, whenever people start invoking Egypt, Egypt comes in later in the story. We'll get to that. But he's like, I saw all these things, all these stories about Moses and like all this stuff. Like, we went and got the 10 Commandments. We won't think about that golden calf right now. But, like we will, like he did all these stories. And the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian. Right? Like that's, and God comes to Gideon. And he's like, I'm going to be with you. And he kind of proves this out to him. And he says, Gideon, I want you to do some things for me. We're going to take care of the Midianites together. And got to remember over there, we're going to take care of the Midianites together. Okay, like that's, like let's do it. Let's do it. Like that's, he's over there. And it's like, well, Gideon, what I want you to do first, there's a lot of idolatry in Israel right now. I want you to tear down the Asherah poles. I want you to tear down all these other things. This is a true-to-life picture of Gideon, by the way. You'll see that coming up. It's like me when I'm working out. Look at all those weights. This true-to-life, I want you to take care of all this idolatry. And Gideon's like, well, if you're with me, God, I can do it. I can do it. And he does do it. He goes in and he tears down these Asherah poles, which are these places of worship for these foreign gods. He goes in and he tears down all of these, like all these altars to all these foreign gods. But do you know when he does it? Did anyone read it? When does he tear them all down? At night. He tears it down at night. And does anyone remember why? It says in the Bible why he did it at night. It's because he's scared of the people. The dude's a coward. He's like, okay, he probably helped the last person out of the door. That was a nice sacrifice, Thaddeus. All that stuff. Close the door. Let's tear us down now in the middle of the night, and everyone's mad at him and stuff like that. Then the next day, he's a coward. He just is. Even though he knows God is with him, he does what God tells him to do, which is good. That's a good step. It's a good step in the right direction. But he does it at night, but he still doesn't trust God. And this is one of the most famous stories here. God tells him again, he's like, we're going to go and defeat these Midianites together. And Gideon's like, I don't know. I don't know if you're really with me, God. Like that's, I just don't know. Here's what I want you to do. I just went on a cruise in Norway, and I came back with this sweet sheep's fleece, the sweet sheepskin rug. Has any of you done that? That joke killed in the first service. Like that's like no one has gone to a Norway cruise and came back with like a sheepskin rug. Yes, I have one. I haven't gone to Norway, but I inherited it from my grandparents, right? So I should have brought it and put it down here. It would have been good. It would have been good. But so he has this sheep like rug, the sheep fleece, and he's like, God, what I want you to do to prove that you are with me, I want you to, like over the night, to make the dew just cover that fleece, to be soaking wet with water, and I want the ground to be like South Florida in the spring, dry, right? Like that's what I want. And so he goes to bed, and he comes out there, he looks, and it's just sopping wet, and everything else is dry. And what I think when I read that, I hear Gideon go, dang it. like oh no. Like I actually got to do something now. Like I still don't trust you. Because remember, he's a coward. Like I still don't trust it. Like let's this time let's reverse it. Let's make it. Could have been just a weird thing, like the moon could have been. Then there's that cloud, and it could have just came down. Like all those things. And he's like, let's the fleece dry, and everything wet. And he wakes up again, comes out of his tent, looks down. And that's the way it is. And I understand this at a fundamental level. I think many of us do, especially like when you're starting new things. Many of you know this, and I think those of you who don't know this, you know it intuitively. I used to sell used cars, all right? I used to sell used cars, and I worked at CarMax, and I remember the day that I started selling cars, because they train you and all that stuff, and there's a lot of steps into buying cars. I mean, and I have to remember all those steps to lead these customers through, and still separate them from all their money to buy this car, right? Like there's a lot of things going on. And I remember like they would have a stand in a certain place, and it's like, oh, it's okay. Welcome to CarMax. My name's Cris. Like that's that whole thing. It's terrifying, right? Like it's over there. And like I talk to other people and they feel the same way. Now, Coley and I don't have any kids, but I've talked to many of you that you feel exactly like that the first time you hold your kid and you're like, oh no. This is too much. I don't know how I'm going to do with this. I don't know how I'm going to get through all these things. We understand like that fear. But the thing is God has called us into all that stuff. God's callings aren't just church things. Like I think sometimes we get it mixed up a little bit, and we think that it's like, oh, the pastor, because he's wearing that fancy white garment, and man, Vance was extra holy for reading today, and all those things, right? Like that the church stuff, that's where the calling of God is. Like no, it's all of our. When I was selling used cars, I was in that calling. Like when you're doing your work, and some of you are retired, you're like, what about me? Well, your calling is to, wake up at 4 and, yell at Jeopardy at some point during the day. Like, I don't know what you guys are doing. But living out in the world that we are in the places that God has put us, it can be scary, but God will often give us the strength to go forward in there, right? Like that's kind of what it is. And don't be like a Pharisee. Don't be like Gideon that's always like, God, if you're really on my side, I'm gonna roll a 3 here, right? Like that's not the way. That's not the way. God is on your side already, and you're already staring at the calling, even if it's scary, right? And He'll be with you. So as we continue through the story here about him shaking in his boots and he's scared going through there, God's like, all right, we are going to defeat the Midianites together. And he tells Gideon, like, gather up the armies of Israel to defeat them. And Gideon's like, I'm pretty sure we have a lot of young people. We can conscript them into the army. It's going to be great. We'll have a lot of people. And sure enough, he's able to gather all these people. He's able to gather 32,000 fighting forces, which is a good amount of people. They're still scared of the Midianites. They're still stronger. It'll be a close battle. But if God is on their side, they can win. But then God says this in chapter 7. You have too many men. What? Like, I can't deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me, saying, my own strength has saved me. I think this is the heart of Judges right here. I think this is it. Because I think we all kind of struggle with that. It's like, even though God has led us to the point, He's led us to this thing, our little sinful side likes to be like Adam, taking the fruit of the tree and wanting to know, the good and evil and all that stuff, wanting to be like God. We're like, I did that. It wasn't God. I get this as an intuitive level because I am often very prideful. Like that's just the way it is. So God says, you got too many people. You got too many people. They will just think that they think that they are going to save themselves. And so there's a lot of numbers that happen, but basically God wants 300 men. So we start off with 32,000, and God tells Gideon, it's like, tell them all, if you are afraid at all, they can go home. And he loses 22,000. That's a lot that we're afraid, right? I'd be in that 22,000. It's like, there's cookies at home. And that's going great over there. And he's left with 10,000. Well, 10,000's a good number. This is great. Like we can defeat these people with 10,000. God's like, it's still not good enough. Gideon, I want you to take them over to the river. And it doesn't really matter how they drink. But there's like one group of guys drinks a certain way, laps like a dog. Another one like brings it up to their mouth. The way, it doesn't really matter. But he says, go for this way, and it leaves 300 men. Now, there's some millennials in the room, and you're thinking about Zack Snyder's 300 Spartans and all that stuff. Different story, okay? Different story. Don't go there. That's not this. But he ends up with 300 men. And they go out in the middle of the night, and they're getting ready for this big battle, and Midian's army is all gathered on the field of battle, and they're all sleeping, ready for the next day. And Gideon and the 300 surround that, and they have torches inside of clay pots, and they like raise up, blow some horns, break the clay pots, and the torches light up all around, and they start yelling, and all the Midianites are like, oh no, and they start like stabbing each other and unaliving each other, and all these things. They're fleeing all around, and there's this great victory. Now with horns blowing and clay pots breaking and lots of noise going all around, and it confuses the army, that sounds like another story in the Bible. Which one is it? It sounds like Jericho. Joshua in the Battle of Jericho. God often works this way, which is this absurd way of defeating other armies and all that stuff. And he completely causes the enemy to go into confusion and just completely annihilates them. God gives them the victory. And everything's great, right? They have rest for 40 years. Now that's an interesting number. 40 years. 40 years they have rest. That sounds an awful lot like Moses leaving Egypt, right? That sounds a lot like that, the rest for 40 years. Now, I want to ask you a question. Why did God's people wander the wilderness for 40 years? Does anyone remember? I'm saying, what? Yeah, because they didn't trust God, right? Like they didn't trust God, and they wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years, right? God takes this great victory over Egypt, parts the Red Sea, and leads them through there, and they're just like, I don't know if I trust this. And they end up building that golden calf. We're going to get to that in a second. Gideon, I don't have time to get into it right now, but Gideon is a lot like Moses. Moses didn't trust his calling at the beginning. They wandered around the wilderness for 40 years because they didn't trust in God. Moses wasn't able to enter the promised land because he acted rashly. and didn't trust God in what God was saying? When Gideon is trusting God, things are good. The problem is that Gideon has a strange ending. And here it is. You guys ready? So Gideon, he's like, that's a pretty great battle, wasn't it? Like, yeah, I'm pretty amazing. Like that's like, I led over, that 300 was my idea. It was great. I got it from the Spartans. I'm pretty excited about it. Like that's, it's like over there, and everyone's like, Gideon, you're the best. Like everyone's wearing like Gideon t-shirts, like Gideon saves and all that stuff t-shirts. It's in the other translations. It's not in the ones we read, right? Like all these things. And he has the people, Gideon, who's this wimp of a guy who God said, here we go, mighty warriors. Like, okay, like he's now standing up. He's like, look at how amazing I am. Yes, I caused that over there. Here's what I want you guys to do. Let's do something great for God, right? Let's say we need to have a good love offering. We need some seed money for all of this right now. What I want you to do is take off your earrings and your gems and your necklaces made of gold. And I need you to get all the gold, and we need you to bring it up to God right now. Like, bring it up right up to here. And they melt down all this gold, and they build an ephod. Do you guys know what an ephod is? Okay, cool. It's like a priest wore it. It's a breastplate. It's a breastplate the priest wore. They're like, oh, that's nice. That's nice. It'd be kind of like if I said, it's like, man, we really had a great Easter. Let's really honor God with some, like, bring your gold in here, and we'll melt it all down, and we'll cover the wood cross back here with that gold, and we'll make it nice and gold and amazing back here, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, that's kind of similar. I think it's funny how the book of Judges describes what happens to that ephod. Because they melted it, and they built it for a priest to wear. You think, like, the book of Judges would be into that, right? But Judges tells the truth. It says Gideon made the gold into an ephod, placed it in Ophrah, I don't know, yeah, his town, and all of Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Ooh. So like we build this like gold cross back here, and then like all of a sudden someone new visits us, right? They like come to Kyler's confirmation, and they find us all like bowing down, worshiping that golden cross back there. They're like, what is going on in this place? And someone looks up with a big smile on their face, like, we have Kool-Aid, like that's like that whole, you'd be weird and creeped out, and you're like, what's going on? This is what's happening to him. Like Gideon has raised himself up to this other level. It's like, I did this. Even though it's obvious that God accomplished the victory, he says, I did this for myself. And I get it. I'm often prideful. That I see the amazing things that have happened through my hands, and it's like, yeah, I did that. But just in church in general, we have this way about us. The biggest way that I see this happen in churches is that someone will create a ministry that's needed. Like 30 years ago, a ministry got started. And it's great. And this ministry is serving all these people, and it did its job for about 10 years. But there's all this institutional memory about how great it is. And so we keep doing it, even though it's not needed anymore. We keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And then, and it's like, why is all this happening? Why are we doing this? It's just built off the greatness of what God had done in the past, right? And sometimes doing those new things is hard. Like this happens in our own lives too, where we're like, in our relationships, we call it getting in a rut, where we just do the same thing week after week after week after week. Like it worked back 20 years ago. Why isn't this working anymore? But it's scary to do those new things sometimes. It's scary to step out in that and say, God was here then, and there might be something new that we're being called to now. I don't know what that's like for you to hear that. But I think that's one of the messages we get from Gideon, is that things are often extremely scary. And things are, and also, it's easy for us to get prideful about stuff. It is. But what's important to remember is that God saves us in absurd ways. God saves us in the left-handed ephod. God saves us through the judge Deborah. God saves us by this God who created everything and all this amazing power and all this glory, and he humbled himself to the point where he died on a cross. God saves us in these small moments, in these 300 moments where he saves us in that way. And that me as a pastor today, standing here, who has issues with my own pride, who I regularly talk to people, there's like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this next week. The fact that God humbled himself down to a 300 to die on a cross and rise again for my salvation and yours, I think is excellent news. And it lets me know that everything's going to be okay. That God saves me by his grace. And that's good news. I invite you to stand for a blessing. God, please be with each and every one of us. Lord, that when our pride gets the best of us and we think that I have done this, Lord, help us to see that you saved us in weakness. And Lord, when we are cowering in fear and you are showing us our callings in front of us, Lord, help us to see that you still die for us and you hold our hand and you lead us through into everywhere that we should go. Lord, we thank you that you love us and that you're always with us. Amen. We'll sing our next